Hey guys, what's up? My name is Jess, and this is Roots and Refuge Farm. We have a lot of new people here. Understandably, a lot of people are very interested in growing food right now, and that's what this video today is going to be about. But first, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about us. My husband, Jeremiah, and I moved out to a house in the country. We have 7 acres. We've been here for about 6 years. We had no experience prior to being here in growing food, homesteading. I did grow up around gardening some, but not in a sense where I had very much experience at all. And I had done some stuff in suburbia, like in pots and containers, but for the most part, we were pretty green getting here. We did not know what we were doing. We didn't have a lot of experience. We didn't have a lot of local resources as far as like mentors to teach us exactly what we should do. We have, in the last 6 years, learned so much and grown so much to where now we're actually producing quite a lot of food for our big family. Right now, I really wanted to do this video to just hand over a lot of information to those of you who are in the position of feeling concerned about food sourcing and wanting to know what food you can grow as quickly as possible if you get started right now. So get a cup of coffee, get something to write with. This is gonna be a lot of information. This is it's a little bit of an alarming time to be alive. I've shared recently and through the process of the coronavirus outbreak happening and spreading and just the public response, I've really shared a lot about not stepping into a place of being afraid because we make very poor decisions whenever we're driven by fear, and I stand by that entirely. However, I do think that though we have not been given a spirit of fear, we are given a sound mind, and I think that being wise and sound of mind in any situation, it really helps combat that fear. And so right now, I know many people are realizing just how fragile our food system is, and it's very fragile. Now, I am noticing a trend on pictures that are being posted from the grocery stores and stuff like that, that a lot of the packaged and processed food is flying off the shelves, but there's still a lot of the fresh stuff because a lot of people don't have the skills of cooking from scratch and preserving. So there are definitely skills that have been lost in our culture, really been lost in my generation and the millennial generation, but I know that there's a group of people who are looking to get that back. And I believe that this particular instance, I'm not minimizing the fact that it's going to be difficult, but I think that, you know, I am kind of the eternal optimist, and I just really believe that this could be an eye-opening thing that could potentially lead a lot of people to a much healthier way of living and a much more sustainable way of living. Those of you who are very new, I know that we've been getting a lot more viewers, and a lot of people are really interested in growing food for the first time. Now, right now, we're at a really good time of year for, if this was gonna happen, I'm really glad that it's now instead of at the end of the fall or the very beginning of winter, because right now many places are to the point that they're really able to start making garden preparations. I know some of you are in much more northern areas or cooler areas and you're not there yet, so I'm actually gonna break up the two things that we're talking about today, and I'm gonna talk about the things you can do before your last frost and the things that you can do after, because over the course of the next couple of months, many people are going to be coming to that point. I know that my last frost date is technically supposed to be a couple weeks from now, but the 10-day forecast shows no temperatures under freezing, so we might not have another frost. But I know some of you are in a place where you've still got two months of really cold weather ahead of you. So today, the exact topic that I want to talk about is how to grow food fast. Like right now, you're realizing, okay, you know, I'm very uncomfortable that there are some empty shelves in the stores. I'm very uncomfortable at the fact that, you know, people are responding in a lot of fear and panic, and I would like to have some food sustainability. And if you haven't made preparations for that, that can be a very uncomfortable place to be. So really what I wanted to bring with this video is, hey, these are the varieties that grow fast, and here are some options that you can do if you are like at this point kind of starting from scratch and saying, what in the world can I do? The first thing that anybody can do, pretty much, whether you're in an apartment and don't have a yard, or if you, you know, or you're in a really northern place, is microgreens. I'm going to do a video about doing that. However, one of the channels that I've learned a lot about microgreens from is the Fit Farmer from Mike Dixon. He's the person who originally taught me how to do them. So I'm going to link him down below and you can check him out if this is something you want to jump into. Now, microgreens are not going to grow a lot of volume. You know, you grow them in trays. Sometimes I'll grow like a half tray. I'm about to start a couple of full trays. And you can harvest microgreens and eat like a microgreen salad. But the benefit of microgreens is they have a lot of nutrition in them. You can use all kinds of seed. You can do basils, turnips, radishes, mustard, kale. There's a very wide array of seeds that you can use to grow microgreens. They are very, very, very packed in nutrition because basically a seed has all of the energy that that plant needs to grow, and when it first sprouts, all of that energy is in that plant. It's just, they're very, very densely nutritious. Even though it might not be the most filling thing, if you are especially eating a lot of processed or packaged foods or something that you're trying to, you know, have shelf stable stuff, this is a really good option to grow at home that pretty much anybody can, where you can add nutrition to whatever you're eating. And we like to do some fried eggs and put a really heavy sprinkle of microgreens on top, or eat them with tacos, and we'll use those in place of like lettuce and tacos, stuff like that. You can put them in salads, just whatever you put them on, it's going to give a boost to it nutritionally. So that's definitely something to get on your radar. I will link Mike's videos down below to give you some information so you can get started on that ASAP. I've shared a video in the past about growing lettuce in a soil bag, and I've used either like a plastic tote on top. I can share that video below, or I've grown them in my greenhouse. So if you have access to some sort of cover like this, if you are in a very, very cold climate and there's no chance that anything is going to live outside, doing a soil bag of lettuce with a grow light over it inside your house may be an option to get something fresh growing. Again, that's not going to be a ton of volume of food, but it is a benefit to just have something that you can go pick from your house that's fresh. And considering the fact that we are looking at the possibility of things like mandatory quarantines where you're not going to be able to leave for a couple of weeks, or you're wanting to limit that kind of exposure for a little while, having fresh food inside your house that you can supplement those shelf-stable things it is very valuable. So I do think that soil bag thing, that trick of growing lettuce in the soil bag, if you are in a place that's cool enough to still do that, it's definitely something that many of you could get started. Right now, my soil bags have all started to go to seed. I had them in my greenhouse. It's really warm in here. You could still do that even in a southern area outside uncovered. It's warm enough now, pretty much zone probably 6B and below, anything warmer than that, to just go ahead and plant lettuce outside. It doesn't have to be covered up. In fact, covering it at this point would probably be a hindrance to it, because the warmer the weather, the faster that lettuce is going to go to seed. Which that segues into what can you plant when it's still cold outside. And of course, I am southern. I understand it's not the case for everybody, but basically these are things that you can go ahead and put in as long as your soil is workable. I usually plant these things, and have in the past planted them from seed in my garden at the beginning of February, where we're still regularly getting temperatures that are in the low 20s at night. So as long as your soil is workable and it's no longer frozen, you can start planting these things. Keep in mind also, you can provide cover for these to warm your soil more. So if you're in a place that is getting really cool at night, if you have frost fabric, even if you go out at night while your seeds are trying to germinate and you cover your soil up with a blanket, just something that's going to keep the really cold temperatures off that ground and allow it to maintain some of the heat that it gathered from the day, you can do that. Just make sure you take it off in the morning, so your things can not get crushed and so they can get sunlight. If you have any old plastic around, I mean, you can create some sort of cover. Don't feel like you have to make something fancy. If we're talking about genuinely growing food during a time of actual need, a lot of the aesthetic stuff and a lot of the stuff that you see people do because it's more convenient or it's prettier, that kind of goes out the window. And so, like, for instance, if you have a piece of plastic, you can cover your plants with that, and it doesn't have to necessarily be propped up. You can use rocks to prop up the edges if you want to kind of keep it up off the plants. You can get creative and resourceful with this. Don't think because you've seen, you know, lovely row covers with, you know, bent wire and they are perfect domes that go all the way down the rows and stuff like that. Don't feel like you have to have it like that in order for it to be effective. Just basically what you're looking for there is to trap heat, to keep your soil from freezing hard at night, to keep your soil warm. That's really what row covers do. And also to trap some heat with the plants and get the worst of the elements off the plants. The things that I'm going to talk about first, these things can really handle some pretty cool temperatures. And so where we are right now, many of you even in more northern climates than here, you can probably go ahead and start planting this stuff. And keep in mind that plants that are direct sown outside in the weather may take a little longer to germinate, but they'll be way hardier than if you started them inside and moved them out, and they'll have to shock and adjust and all of that stuff. A lot of times direct sowing these things is really the best if you're looking for the most successful outcome of food fast. So radishes, I talk about radishes a lot. I think that they're a great beginner gardener thing to grow. Radishes in ideal circumstances come to fruition in about 23 to 28 days. So you're looking at food fast. One seed equals one radish root, and you're going to plant those about 1.5 inches apart from each other. Now this is accepting there are some really large radishes called tillage radishes like daikon. China rose is technically considered one of those. There are a lot of those that you can look at, and those are going to take longer, and those are good, but as far as like food super fast, I would go for the small varieties like French breakfast, cherry bell, really at this point any variety that you can get your hands on the seeds for of a small radish. These are going to be a really great thing to get food fast. Radishes can be roasted. This is like a total game changer, and it takes them from being those really spicy kind of bitter things. We actually eat radishes a lot whenever we're harvesting them by just scrubbing them, quartering them, putting a little oil and salt and pepper on them in a 400-degree oven until they start softening up and kind of browning on the edges, and just roasting them as you would potatoes. They become really mellow, and that's a substantial thing. So if you're feeding your family, you can feed radishes as a large side. That's going to be a filling side. And so I definitely suggest that being something to grow, and you can plant those when it's still you're having consistent temperatures that are below freezing. If you can warm them up and warm the soil up, they're going to germinate faster. As for me here right now, where we're still you know, having some lows in the 30s, but having nice, warm, consistent 50 to 60 degree days, my radishes are exploding and they're growing like crazy right now. As well as radishes, you also have other root vegetables like beets and turnips. I'm actually planting a lot of beet and turnip seeds today. Both of these things kind of start to struggle a little bit when it gets really warm, so this is still like the ideal time to plant them. And they're not as fast as radishes. Beets, a lot of times in turnips, they're going to take probably about 50 days in ideal circumstances to really reach full size, maybe 60 days. But the thing is that if you really need them, you can just harvest them and eat them small. And beets and turnips both produce greens. Now you can eat radish greens also. They're kind of spicy and peppery. They get a little prickly when they get bigger, but beets and turnip greens stay really tasty for a long time. And you can actually harvest some of the greens off of those and they'll still produce roots. You can't take all their greens because then they can't photosynthesize and grow, but you can harvest a few of the leaves off of each plant and you're still going to get a root from that, and you're getting greens. So that's going to give you food fast because it's giving you greens now and roots later. And again, those roots are going to be really kind of high in sugar content. They're going to be like a really substantial thing that you can build a meal around, and they're going to be really filling. Again, I'm not really going into varieties a lot. I know that multiple seed companies are running out of stock. They're having to shut down and not able to ship. And so I'm really just going to tell you these basic things. And if you have to get your seeds locally, or if you've already got seeds, again, like I said, when it comes down to planting for necessity, a lot of the frills, all of that stuff, that kind of takes second priority. It's still fun. I'm still loving this. It's bringing me a lot of joy, but I'm planting a lot more practical stuff this year and not worrying so much about planting the things that are just beautiful. I'm still planting some of those, but yeah, definitely I'm leaning more towards production than I usually do, just because I want to be as prepared as possible, not just for my family, but to be able to help other people. Another thing that grows really fast is our Asian greens, like bok choy, pak choy, thai soy, I think is one of them. I can't remember how to say that. But essentially, like bok choys, these are really quick growing. It's another thing that once they start growing, if you need to harvest them young, to eat them young, you can, or you can let them get a little bit bigger. There are a lot of little cutesy varieties that are like teeny tiny ones. I actually was planning on planting a lot of those and decided not to. I'm planting the full size ones because, again, I'm leaning more towards volume at this point. But I've got a lot of purple bok choy out in my beds right now. It's very forgiving of cool weather, and they grow really fast. Some bok choys and pak choys are at the size to harvest them in less than 50 days from sowing, so that's pretty good. And those things can be eaten fresh, and they can be sauteed. They're really tasty when you saute them. All of the things I'm talking about today, they don't require a lot of production, and they're versatile. Like those beets and turnips, you can cut those up and cook them in a soup with some broth and some onions and celery. You could throw some beans in with it, or some chicken, or whatever it is that you have in that, and make that soup. I've done a really good like chicken and dumplings recipe that has a lot of root vegetables in it, and dumplings and chicken. It's really, really tasty, and that's super simple. You can just kind of wing it on that, and it does really well. As well as roasting those, just like the radishes. You can quarter those up, just basic, just some oil and some salt and pepper if you like that, and put them in a hot oven, and all the sugars are going to caramelize. It'll be really tasty, and that mellows the flavor out. If you have beet haters, feed them roasted beets and you can probably change their mind. And the same thing with the bok choy and the Asian greens. Stir frying those is a really good. With greens, about any type of greens, a quick saute really makes them shine. That goes for kale and spinach, any sort of Asian greens. You just, you know, dice them up, saute an onion in a skillet with a little bit of oil, and then put those greens in there with that onion, and they cook down really fast. And you know, salt, maybe some garlic, and you've got a really tasty dish. My kids eat this kind of stuff. It took a little while of being like, hey, you know, I want you to at least try it. But if you make it like that, where you're using fresh ingredients, you're really letting the flavor shine, you're just using a little oil and salt, I have found that my kids will adamantly refuse to eat it because of the way it looks. But then I say, will you please just take one bite, because I think you're really going to like this. And they'll take a bite and they'll go, oh wow, that's actually pretty good. And that's just been my experience. So with the Asian greens, really easy to cook like that. And kale and that kind of green, which mustard greens is kind of what I'm lumping in with kale. These are both cool weather brassica plants that you could direct sow now. With any of these kinds of things, like with kale and mustard, you can harvest these at like 25 or 30 days for baby greens, and you can just eat them as a salad whenever they're really tender and small. If you have a young kale plant that has like 5 or 6 leaves off of it, and you take 3 of them, that plant is going to continue to grow. As long as you don't cut the entire thing off, that plant's going to continue to grow. And the larger it gets, if you just take a few leaves from a plant at a time, and you've got 20 plants, so you go out and you take a few leaves from each of them, you have a really large harvest, and your plants just continue to grow, and you're going to get to harvest again from them. And with kale and lettuces and the Asian greens and mustard and all of these things where we're actually eating just the leaves of these plants, you can just take a little bit and you can eat them from baby greens all the way up to when they fully mature. We eat kale as baby greens, just like in salads. Once it starts getting older, I don't like to eat it raw because it's got such a bite to it. It takes on more of a cabbage texture. But then it's really great cooked into soups. You can bake it in your oven and make kale chips with just oil and salt on it, and it gets good and crispy. My kids can eat so much kale chips. It's something that's really versatile. If you have a juicer, it's a really great way to get nutrients, is juicing things like kale and all of these greens, turnip greens, beet greens. And these are things that come about really fast. With kales and lettuce, mustard, any of these greens, you can harvest baby greens usually in right under a month in good circumstances. It's going to grow slower if it's cool or not sunny. If you can bring in that warmth, or if you're in a place that's already warm, it's going to grow really well, and you're going to have those harvests within a month. And then within 2 months, you're going to have full-size leaves. And if you start harvesting a few of the leaves when they're small, you're going to have food starting in a month and let it continue to grow. And then you're going to keep having more and more food over the course of the next couple of months. So it's a really great thing to give space to. Another thing that you can plant from when it's really cool outside is snow peas. And this is like snap peas and shelling peas. Now, what I have seen some people do, and I have not done this, is you can actually sow peas really closely together and harvest the shoots, like and kind of how you would have a microgreen, but it's pea shoots, and you just eat them like in salads or in sautés. It's in a lot of Asian cuisine to eat pea shoots. And what I was actually speaking with someone recently, and they were talking about maximizing a small garden space and that they wanted to grow peas. And I said, well, what you could do is you could sow your peas really thickly and then thin them all out, eat the shoots, and then leave one plant every 6 inches to grow to maturity. And so that's something that you could do, and you could have pea shoots to eat in 3 or 4 weeks, and then in another month beyond that, you're going to have full-size plants that are going to start producing peas. Now, I would say if you're trying to get food fast, snap peas, harvesting them young as snap peas, you're going to get to eat them more. And you know, as long as you're staying on top of harvesting those, the plant's going to continue to put out more flowers, and you're going to get more peas to harvest. So that's something that's definitely good. Do know that peas really start to struggle when your days are consistently above 90 degrees or so. So here we grow peas this time of year. I have peas in the garden right now, but they will be done by like the middle of May. So I don't plant just like a substantial amount of them, and I usually just harvest them as snap peas because trying to grow the shelling peas is a little more difficult for me because of how hot it gets. One green that I didn't mention before is chard. Chard is a really, really hardy plant. It's something that you can plant when it's quite cold outside. It handles very cold temperatures, and it's another green. You can harvest it as a baby green within probably 30 to 40 days. It's going to be pretty good as a baby green, and then beyond that, once it hits about 50 to 60 days, it's going to be mature enough to have large leaves, which can be cooked into quiches or soups or sauteed, eaten fresh, juiced. There are lots of options with that. And also collard greens. Collard greens are pretty versatile. They handle the heat pretty well, and they can handle some very cold temperatures. Now, I've not done much harvesting collard greens young, but they're at maturity within like 50 days or so, and they just keep going. They're really good plant to grow for having a lot of greens that are going to produce a lot and relatively quickly and pretty resiliently. The last cold weather thing that I was going to talk about, which I actually have this sitting right here, so I'll show you. Onion sets are really affordable. They're in stores right now. Again, it really depends on where you are and whether you're able to go pick things up at the store. I got these pretty recently. I just got these from like Tractor Supply, and they were on sale, and it was about $2, I think, for these 80 onion sets. And you get your onion sets like this. They're just little bulbs. There are probably still some places that are shipping these. All the rest of our onions came from Stark Bros. Hostels may have some. Fruition Seeds may have some. I don't know at the time of filming this and when you guys are going to watch it who all's still shipping. But basically, you get these bulbs, you plant them with a little root side down. And I've got some in here that have sprouted so you can kind of see. And they shoot their sprout up, which this one's curly because it's been in this bag, but it goes straight up. Given 80 to 100 days, these are going to produce an onion, like a full-size onion. However, if you're wanting food fast, if you can get these onion sets and go ahead and get them started, if you need to, you can go ahead and harvest them as green onions. So that's actually why I went ahead and got some more, because I have a lot in my beds already that I want to grow out to full-size onions. But if you go ahead and put these in, you can put them in before the frost is over. They can handle some cold temperatures and get established. Leeks as well. I've got leeks in my bed. Once they put up their stalk, you can go and harvest green onions, and that can add flavor to your food. And that'll basically give you the benefit of an onion without having to wait that long. The only thing is, obviously, with so many things, if you harvest them early and you eat them young, you're forfeiting volume later. But if you're wanting food fast, if you plant a lot of them, you can start harvesting them young, and then you can let some of them come to maturity. That's kind of it for the before the frost is over. And a lot of those things, like I said, you're usually looking at 8 weeks or so before your estimated last frost date that you can start direct sowing those. So many parts of the country right now, people are in a place where they can go ahead and plant this stuff. Some of the issues that you may run into in growing these cool weather crops and these brassicas are pests. If you are running into pests, if you have something like tulle or like a netting that you can drape over your plants, that's going to keep the moths off and therefore keep the caterpillars off, because they'll keep them from laying eggs on them. If you have access to ordering things or getting things, there are a couple of things that you can use. Particularly, there's a organic pesticide called BT, and that really combats worms, and worms are going to be your biggest pest that you deal with brassicas. The other thing is neem oil. That will help. If you spray your stuff with neem oil, that will help with aphids. That's another thing that you're going to deal with some of these things. Those are probably the two main pests I've dealt with here, and those are the things that I use for them. And all of these things do pretty well in average soil. Now, if you're trying to grow roots, you don't want to add a lot of nitrogen to your soil. So you don't necessarily need to like add a ton of compost to soil where you're trying to grow roots, because essentially when you add a lot of nitrogen, it encourages leaf growth, not root growth. And so if you're trying to grow kales and greens and all of that, nitrogen's great. So if you've got composted manure, or if you've got compost, if you have access to something like rabbit manure that you could put in your garden, that's something you can put in directly. All of those things are really gonna boost that leaf growth, which is what you want when you're trying to harvest the leaves. But if you're trying to grow the roots, I would say pretty average soil does okay. Now let's talk about the warm weather stuff. This is the stuff that you're gonna plant after the threat of frost has passed. For those of you who are in more southern areas than me, you are probably beyond the time frame to plant your cold weather stuff. You could possibly still do the onions for the green onions, and you could probably still do some greens if you're going to harvest them as baby greens. But likely those of you who are in places like Louisiana and South Texas, you are well past planting anything that needs cooler weather. And so let's talk about the things that need to go in after the last frost. One thing that really is a fantastic producer that's very simple are their cherry tomatoes. I would hesitate to suggest growing things like beefsteaks and slicers for the new gardener that's not got any preparation done, because those things I think do a lot better with some experience, some established bed space, with pruning and the knowledge of all of that. And if you don't have that, if you're looking for fast food and volume, those take 80 days from transplanting and good circumstances to really yield a very good crop. So I would say no on the big tomatoes. I would say that's not where your focus needs to be if you're looking to grow volume fast. I would say go with cherry tomatoes. They're pretty wild. You don't have to prune them to get a really great harvest. They do like really rich soil and well-fed soil, and they will do best if they are started indoors about 6 weeks before your last frost date. If you live in a really warm place, you can go ahead and direct sow them and they'll be fine. I have volunteer plants that produce a lot every year. But yeah, definitely cherry tomatoes are on the food fast list. They usually produce something like 50 days after transplanting is when you start harvesting cherry tomatoes. That's a little longer wait than some of the other things that we're talking about, because pretty much everything else we're talking about is producing 40 to 50 days after it's originally sown. But I feel like because of the fact that cherry tomatoes are potential of so much volume, they're worth that little extra wait. And if you're trying to get food in to sustain you over the course of the summer, I think definitely planting a handful of those plants is a good move. Cucumbers. Cucumbers are very easy as long as you can give them water. If you're in a place that you can water them well, if you have an area of your yard even that gets a little bit of afternoon shade, cucumbers can do fine with that. They actually can appreciate a little afternoon shade. You can direct sow them and you will be harvesting cucumbers in about 45 days from direct sowing. I like the pickling varieties, but like I said, in times that are maybe a little uncertain, it really doesn't matter. Cucumbers do best if you can give them some sort of support. They don't have to be grown on a trellis. However, when your fruit's laying on the ground, it's more likely to get damaged by bugs. So putting cucumbers where they can grow up a fence. I use my cattle panels to grow them, and making sure that they're able to get enough water. Just sow them after your threat of frost has passed. You don't have to start them ahead of time. Just put the seed in the ground as soon as the threat of frost has passed, and you'll have food really quickly, and a lot of food. Cucumber plants can produce a lot of volume. And of course you can make pickles by canning them in brine. You can ferment them to make pickles. We juice a lot of cucumbers. We drink a lot of vegetable juice and salads, both just fresh eating and then making like marinated salads. You can go through a lot of cucumbers, and that can provide a lot of food. Summer squash. Summer squash. Now I have a hard time with summer squash because we have really bad squash bugs here. But again, I'm going to try the netting to see if that can help us keep the pests off of our plants. But squash produces really quick. A lot of summer squash varieties, from the time you plant the seed, you will be harvesting food in 40 days. So that's really great. They need well-fed soil. They need sunlight, 8 hours a day sunlight. And you will need to be kind of vigilant on pests with them. But many of the pests that you deal with them, if you've got the time, you can hand pick them every day. Just go over, look underneath the leaves to find the eggs that are laid on there. That's really the best way to stay on the offense when it comes to summer squash. With summer squash and cucumbers, if you're living in a more northern area and you're wanting to get a head start on those things so that you don't have to wait that full 45 days from sowing to harvesting, you can start them inside. They do best if their roots are not disturbed when they're transplanted. So if you want to make like some newspaper pots, or if you have like pulp pots or something like that, that is definitely the best way to get food the fastest if you are still on the other side of your frost date and you're waiting for the cold weather to subside. I would say I probably would not start them more than 3 weeks indoors before I knew I was going to be able to transplant them, because they don't like their roots being disturbed, and if they begin to get root bound in whatever you've started them in, they're going to shock really hard whenever you transplant them. So I would say like 2 or 3 weeks before your last frost date, you could go ahead and start cucumbers and squash, preparing to get those in the ground to get food as quick as possible. One of the things that I really advocate as far as growing volume quickly is okra. Especially for a newer gardener that lives in a warm place. I cannot attest for this for colder areas. I have no idea how okra would grow. I think there's probably a reason it's not popular in the north and it is popular in the south, because it grows really, really prolifically in very poor soil conditions in hot weather. And so that's something that if you plant 10 okra plants, you will be covered up in okra. I usually feed my family very regularly off about 10 or 12 plants. I don't put up a lot of it, and I'm planting more this year, hoping to preserve some, putting in the freezer and stuff. But okra is actually surprisingly versatile. There is a diet plan called Trim Healthy Mama, and they are the ones, my mother-in-law did this diet plan a few years ago, and she kind of opened my eyes to how they put okra in a lot of things. They just take frozen okra and they blend it into smoothies and all of that, and it completely masks it. Don't make that face. It completely masks it. You cannot taste it, but okra has in it what's called mucilage. It's that slime that makes okra haters hate okra, but it's very, very, very good for your digestive tract. Okra is very good for you. If you can't stand to eat it, I eat it raw. I love it. But if you can't stand to just eat it, being able to put it in smoothies is a good way to get it down and a good way to get it into kids. It is a producer that produces volume, and usually probably, I would say within, it takes a little bit longer to get started. Germination on okra sometimes takes a little while, and that first early stage takes a little while, but once it really starts to grow, it grows super fast. It flowers early. It starts to produce pods. You can start harvesting them probably within 50 days from sowing. You're going to start getting pods, and even though it starts slow, once it booms and explodes, you're going to be harvesting your okra twice a day, and I'm not exaggerating. It produces a lot. You can start it ahead of time, but it's kind of another one of those plants that if you start them ahead of time and you direct sow, usually they level out, just because the shock factor of moving the plants out ends up losing any progress that you make rather than direct sown plants are as a general rule, they're just more hardy because they're acclimated being outside, and so they typically grow faster in the younger stages. Lastly, on the fast food for warm weather, I put beans, specifically like bush and pole green beans, snap beans. Pole beans take a little bit longer to start producing, and when I mean that, I'm saying like maybe a week longer, so it's not that big of a difference, but they produce more because pole beans are indeterminate, so they're just going to keep growing as you give them nutrients, water, and structure to climb on. And you will harvest pole beans every single day. I usually do a row that's about 40 feet, and I'm completely covered up in pole beans. Bush beans don't produce quite as much because they put on one big flush of flowers and then they're done. They're determinate plants, so they're a determined amount of flowers that's going to set. But they produce sooner, so maybe you could plant some of both if you were looking to be in that, in beans. And bush beans, a lot of times you're harvesting within 45 or 50 days from sowing them. They grow really, really fast. Also, like the peas, if you sow them thick, you can thin them and eat bean sprouts. So don't throw away the sprouts that you pluck to thin. Those are food, so you can definitely eat those. Are great sauteed. One other plant that I kind of hesitated including this one because it is really specific, and if you don't have the seeds for it, I'm not 100% sure you'll be able to obtain those right now. But red Malabar spinach is something that we grew last year. That it's a green, it's not a true spinach, it's almost succulent-y, and then the leaves is kind of got that mucilage inside similar to okra, and it climbs and it produces like crazy. Loves the heat, very, very forgiving plant, doesn't require a lot, was honestly very impervious to pests. I had dealt with 0 pests on the Malabar spinach last year. And so if you have those seeds, or you have the ability to get some from a friend that can mail them to you, I'm not sure if you'll be able to find them on a store right now because I don't know who's shipping. That is definitely something to plant after the frost pass. It's not frost hardy at all, so you got to wait till it's not going to freeze it. But man, as far as production and greens in the summer, because if you do live in a warm area, greens can be difficult because they go to seed. That plant was a showstopper, and it's definitely something that during times of needing production, it makes the cut. There are a lot of other things that you can do. I'm growing a lot of potatoes this year. I'm growing sweet potatoes this year. I am establishing a lot of perennials, and there are a lot of other things I grow. I will grow tons of tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, but I did not feel like, for the sake of the topic of this video, which is food fast, I just didn't feel like those really fell into that category aside from cherry tomatoes. I think that you should still plant those things because you're going to need food late in the summer just as much as early in the summer. But I think being able to get these things in your garden now that can give you the peace of mind that you're going to be producing some of your own food as soon as possible is definitely good information. Let's talk about animals because I'm getting this question. I'm getting these messages, and so I want to talk about animals. If you're thinking, I need food sustainability, let me get the animals right now, but you have no experience with them, I encourage you that you're on the right track, that raising your own food is definitely the right thing to do. The learning curve is much steeper with animals. I genuinely think, as far as food sustainability goes, the garden is your best bet on feeding your family. However, if you're looking at animals, let me just give you a couple of facts. If you get a doe that is currently in milk, if you're looking for a doe that is in milk because you want to have milk for your family. I know nothing about cows. I'm not the person to ask about that. But with goats, if you get a doe that had kidded 6 months ago, she's already past her peak production, so you're going to get some milk from her, but you're not going to get a lot. So you want to find a doe that's kidded very recently or is very heavy bred if you feel confident in your ability to deal with any issues that may arise with kidding. If you think, oh, I want milk on my homestead, and you just go buy a goat that's not bred and a boy goat because you're going to breed them, do understand that it's going to be 5.5 months on the minimum before you have milk on your farm. And so that might not be the best decision to make during the current circumstances with things being up in the air. I would not make that decision right now for a new animal owner to go do that. Because you're going to have to feed those animals. You're going to have to keep them healthy. You're going to have to go through kidding and then the process of the first couple weeks of having baby goats before you ever get any milk that you get to keep. With chickens, if you can obtain a laying flock of chickens that are under 2 years old but that are laying, that's a good thing. Like, if you can get a small laying flock, that's a good way to get your house in food right away because chickens are going to be laying. They do shock when you move them. Sometimes, like if you get new chickens, they might not lay right away when you get them, but if they're healthy, they should lay soon. If you are obtaining chickens that are over 2 or 3 years old, they're probably not going to be laying as much. If you buy chicks, it's going to be 16 to 19 weeks before they're laying eggs for you. So keep that in mind. If you're buying chicks right now, you'll be feeding them for the next 4 months before they're producing food for you. Might be worth it to you, might not. You just have to make that decision. If you have the space to free range a small amount of chickens, like if you have like a normal yard, you could probably free range 8 birds in that, feeding them your kitchen scraps and a small amount of grain, and they'll still lay really well for you. You can supplement them from your garden, and they're still going to lay really well for you. And so I would say that would be something really that you could consider right now. I think laying hens are a really good move for somebody trying to produce food fast for their family. As far as meat birds go, I don't know what the status is of hatcheries. I know that Murray Mcmurray is still shipping whenever I talk to them, but I just don't know how all that's going to play out. If you can get something like Cornish rocks or something that do put on weight really fast, and you know that you can source the food to be able to feed them, those can be butchered and put in the freezer in about 9 weeks. And so that's really fast food as long as you can source what you need to get the birds and feed the birds. So that's something to consider right now. I would hesitate jumping in on a big scale. If you don't have a lot of experience with raising animals and you don't know 100% that you're going to be able to source their feed, don't buy a bunch of them. Get a small laying flock. You could do a small number of meat birds, get a couple of goats that are already freshly in milk or soon to be in milk. So I guess with the conclusion when it comes to raising meat, this current pandemic, it won't last forever. And knowing that that's the situation of where meat is, the meat industry is very messed up and it's very fragile. And so knowing that that's where it is, yes, I absolutely encourage you, if you're a meat eater, to raise your own meat. 100%. Yes, do it. I just went and bought milk goats yesterday, 2 days ago. Yeah, 2 days ago. I just went and bought milk goats. I bought some goats that were in milk because mine weren't going to be kidding for another 3 months. So obviously, like, I think that that's a sustainable move. I think that it's a good move to source your animal-based products from your home when at all possible. However, in the terms of growing food fast, like you're realizing I got to do something different, I would be very hesitant to encourage anyone in this exact moment in time, and this could change in 3 weeks from now, but in this exact moment in time, to say, yes, go obtain the animals to start doing your own meat right now. Because getting in over your head is not good, and it's that thing of not being fear driven in your decisions. And I think that you are much more likely to settle for animals that maybe aren't in their prime whenever you are feeling rushed to do something. And I think it would be much better for you to not get stuck with a decrepit old goat that, you know, doesn't even need to be bred again and, you know, is barely producing any milk, or old chickens that lay 1 egg a week or whatever. Like I would hate to see somebody feel the rush to produce their own food at home and make a decision like that. And then you've got to feed and care for that animal because it is a living creature and you have to take care of it. So I guess my advice is this: just make sure before you make any of those decisions that you're really educating yourself in what you want. And if it's not something that you would buy out of a time of crisis, don't buy it in a time of crisis. If those would not be the ideal chickens for you 3 months from now when things have kind of leveled off, don't buy it now, because it's going to be just as much a pain in your butt right now, if not more, if you're having trouble sourcing food for it or medicine for it or whatever. Again, I think our best bet is the garden, things that turn around fast, a small flock of laying hens, possibly a small number of meat birds if you know you can get food for them, or goats that have just freshened if you know that you can provide for them the care that they need. I think those could be good decisions right now, but I also very much stand by the statement that I think the garden is 100% the best bet for a sustainable food option, especially during this time of year. We are at the prime time of year to be tackling and taking on higher production because we feel like we need it. I know that this is long. I know that this is a lot of information. I do hope that it helps you. If you have any suggestions of food that you've had experience with, there are a lot of things that I thought about putting on, like Jerusalem artichokes and, you know, tubers and different things that I thought, oh, but I don't have enough experience growing those to confidently advise other people to grow them. So if you have the experience of something like that, let's bring this big, beautiful mind of this group together. Put your comments down below. Share your tips if you've got something that you feel like is a high producer and a fast producer. If you've got any tips of how to grow it, please put those down below. Let's help each other. Let's encourage each other. I firmly believe that something good comes out of everything bad, and that during this very difficult time, this could be a realignment that we humans desperately need to come back to sourcing our food in a sustainable and a healthy way. I think this could be eye-opening, that we need to slow down and refocus on our families and our homes. I think that we have a beautiful opportunity here if we embrace it and we decide to be students during this time. And so I just want to encourage you guys that you're on the right track. Just being here and being seekers of information, you're on the right track, and that it's going to be okay, and that you can do this. You can grow food. You can have experience just a turnaround in your homes and your diets and the way that you live your life. So thank you guys for watching. I do hope this helps you, and I bless you. Until next time.